Good evening. Now, not too long ago, I made a video talking about the Lighthouse, which is a landmark in King's Cross, and the many theories as to why this landmark was built. One of the theories that I've heard over the years is that it housed a camera obscura. This was a once popular form of attraction whereby images are projected onto a screen in a darkened room. A sort of precursor to the cinema, I guess. There was a camera obscura at King's Cross, fairly briefly, but not in the Lighthouse. Ultimately, it comes down to a much larger question. Why is King's Cross called King's Cross? King's Cross has always had something of a reputation for being kind of dodgy. It's an area of London located just to the north of the city, next to Clerkenwell. It was a place where rubbish was dumped. There were piles of ashes and horse bones. A smallpox hospital was opened where the coal drops yard is now. There were houses, but of the poorest kind. Until the 19th century, the area was known as Battlebridge. It's not clear exactly which battle was supposedly fought here, but local legend has it that Boudica had her last stand here, and was buried between platforms 9 and 10 at King's Cross Station. Well, obviously not at the station, but you know what I mean, I'm sure. In short, aside from one bit of ancient and possibly apocryphal history, Battlebridge was a horrible place. In fact, landlords complained that it was impossible to rent their houses out because Battlebridge was such a notorious place. A cynic might say, well, why not make your houses less dilapidated? But the local landowners decided that it would be easier to just rename the area. King's Cross itself is a crossroads. In the early 19th century, the street layout was slightly different. With the construction of St Pancras Station in the 1860s, Euston Road was slightly diverted. This is why the older King's Cross Station sits back from the street at an angle. Still, the crossroads seemed like a good place to centre this image makeover, so they decided in 1820 that they should call it something or someone's cross. A popular suggestion was Boadicea's Cross, after the legendary battle that again might well not have happened here. Another was St George's Cross, but this too was rejected. That year, the Prince Regent had officially ascended the throne to become King George IV, so they decided that it would be nicely patriotic to call it King's Cross. Why not say King George's Cross? I don't know. Maybe they wanted something that wouldn't date when the next monarch came around. The name caught on. By the 1830s, people were already calling the area by its new name, and land values had risen. The trick of just giving something a nice new name was one that estate agents and developers would continue into the present day. But another project was in the offing. A local architect named Stephen Geary proposed something that would really put King's Cross on the map, figuratively as well as literally. They had a cross, but where was the king? Geary's suggestion was a massive statue of His Majesty to stand on the crossroads. He had reason to believe that this might receive some royal patronage. The king had already given his support to a project known as the Royal Pandemonium, an entertainment complex including a pleasure garden, theatre, concert hall and hotel, also to be built in King's Cross. Unfortunately, Geary's suggestion came at a bad time. In 1830, the king passed away. He did not give his patronage to Geary. Still, the architect was not put off and arranged a public subscription to raise his monument, now a memorial. The trouble was that King George IV was not someone for whom the public had a great deal of affection. He's often considered to be Britain's most hated monarch and certainly a strong contender for the worst. He had a string of mistresses, he treated his queen and his daughter extremely badly, he ran up an insane amount of gambling debt, and one of his courtiers, Charles Greville, said of him, "A more contemptible, cowardly, unfeeling, selfish dog does not exist." And that's a man whose job it was to suck up to him. This was a time when the government offered no support to the increasing numbers of the poor, the cost of bread was on the rise, and the worst excesses of the Industrial Revolution were starting to take hold. George's lifestyle was, in other words, an insult to the average Briton. When His Majesty died of his excesses, morbidly obese and virtually immobile, even the most conservative newspapers couldn't summon up many good words to say about him. All this is a very roundabout way of saying that a public subscription for a monument to George IV wasn't likely to be a winner. And indeed it wasn't. So, Geary went back to the proverbial drawing board and reworked his design. It would still be magnificent, he wasn't going to move on that, but it was going to be low budget. All told, it cost £25, which even then was not much. The structure would mostly be built of brick and faced in stone. The statue itself would be fully 11 feet tall, standing on top of a 65-foot-tall plinth, all done in the neoclassical style. It was built at the junction of the streets now known as Gray's Inn Road, Euston Road and Pentonville Road, about where the Lighthouse is now, in fact. The base was built in 1830 and the statue in 1835. The monument was no more popular than its subject. The statue was considered to be a poor likeness, and the whole thing was considered rather gaudy and tasteless. The question was, what to do with it? Initially, it was used as a very small exhibition space, then as a very small police station, then as a very small pub with a camera obscura in the upper level. This, I think, is the origin of the story of the camera obscura in the lighthouse. There was also a clock, which is another theory I've seen offered as to the purpose of the lighthouse, so, again, I don't know if there was some confusion there. Enough about the lighthouse, back to the unpopular monument. So unpopular was it, in fact, that in 1842, a mere 7 years after being put there, the statue was taken down. Apparently its nose was sold to an antiquary for 6p, but my sources sadly don't say who that was. As for the rest, well, it didn't last much longer. It was more of a nuisance than anything else, getting in the way of traffic at a busy junction. In 1845 it was taken down, and few, if any, raised objections. So ended the saga of one of the most hated monuments in London's history. The gentrification of King's Cross didn't last long either. Soon it would regain its reputation for being unpleasant and down-market, and it wouldn't really shake that until the 21st century. It seems that a useless folly topped with a bad statue of an unpopular king that got in the way didn't achieve anything at all. Who could have guessed? Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do click the like button and consider subscribing for more London oddities in King's Cross and elsewhere. Thanks to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon, you are the wonky statue to my gaudy plinth. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.